I'm an alcoholic. Is passing the basket during the open meeting of AA contradicting the seventh tradition long form? No.
Okay. What is the best or your favorite question that you get in Q&A sessions at conferences, and what do you answer? This is my favorite question that I've ever... Anything about God is my favorite question because it's so much fun to talk about that. And so many questions about God, you can't give, direct answers. A lot of times you have to have a story or something to illustrate the point. And if I come up with a good story and it seems to work, then that makes me very, very happy. Although sometimes there'll be questions about disputes going on in AA. And there's a little mean part of me that just loves tearing into those. So
I didn't mean to be dismissive of the first question. I think we tend to use the traditions as rules, and we look for violations of them. If we treated each other that way in Alcoholics Anonymous, we could hold the International at this hotel. In substance, as a principle, if your non-alcoholic sister goes to an open meeting and dumps $1 in the basket, I just don't think the substance of that is a violation of the tradition. If I ahead of time told her that, only, those of us that are in the program do that, but I see Al-Anon throw bucks in the program and stuff like that, and I just don't think that's a violation of the principle of the tradition. Will you go into the history of AA on the West Coast? Chuck C., a Jewish guy who finds the book in his trunk and gets sober. I do not know that history. So I'm sorry that I don't. That sounds like an interesting story. And should we ask someone if someone does and give them 2 minutes to do that? Or should we just go? Did we pay back the original $5,000 used to save Dr. Bob's house and provide a stipend to Bill and Bob? I don't know how much or exactly how much of what of the money that we gave, that the Rockefellers gave us, that we paid back. It was I was told, and I don't know even how accurate it was, that we did pay back the money that we got out of the Rockefeller dinner for the 3 or 5 years after we chewed on that. I don't think we did. I don't know. Why the hell should I say I don't think we did? I just don't know the answer to the question. But when it was discussed a couple of times, and when I was in New York, when it got brought up, I've heard from fairly reliable sources a couple of times that we paid the Rockefellers back. And but I don't know the details of that. Do you, Sandy?
Yeah, I think they paid everything back, and then Bill wrote a letter to Rockefeller saying AA would never have to take any more money ever. And that was the self-sufficiency beginning. That's what I think. They paid it all. Good questions. What happened to Roland Hazard? He went on to become a very successful businessman, and when he died, the obituaries in the major newspapers were really big, and somebody sent me, I have a file on him. And if you went, he didn't stay in Oxford or AA or anything like that, but the papers and accounts would lead you to believe that he did stay sober and lead a happy life. But some of the documents that I was given are letters from his brothers who felt otherwise, that he was, in the later years, having some problems with alcohol, but still hanging in there. So in other words, a functioning alcoholic. So if you trust the family members, he did very well, but then had some problems near the end. But he clearly was a very well-known businessman, and all the major papers carried a big story about his death.
I'm going to Rhode Island in October, and he's buried in Rhode Island. I'll ask some of the Rhode Island people if they know anything about his history. With the International coming in San Diego, can you tell us about some of your experiences at the Internationals? First International, the first International I actually had a ticket to go to, but didn't go to, was Miami. Forever kind of kicked myself because I would have liked to have seen Bill Wilson. Linda's father was deathly ill for Denver, and we had tickets to go, and I stayed home and babysat, and she went and visited her father. And the first one we went to was New Orleans, and they're just great. The biggest moment for me in the whole International is Friday night and holding hands and have 50,000 people say the Lord's Prayer.
Not anymore.
I just was shocked that we gave that up in Minneapolis. I just couldn't believe. I mean, I was told everybody, if you only do one thing at International, go to the Friday night meeting and hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer. And it's just, you know, I mean, that conversation is, I know it goes on at different meetings and stuff like that, but it's part of our tradition, and we're giving some of that up, like we've given up some of the traditions in our country, and it's too bad. I think it is a sense of bigness that you get. I think they're frustrating because there's so much to do, and I'm kind of a guy that wants to do it all, and you can't, and you just go nuts trying to figure out who to have dinner with and meals. I mean, you almost have. I should have a lobotomy just before I go. But they are like meetings I've attended outside of the United States. There is something in the context to which you get a sense of the largeness and bigness and the grace of Alcoholics Anonymous on a universal scale, and I think it's very powerful, and it's a lot of fun.
And if you feel like it, you could say the Lord's Prayer.
There's a movement about that.
There's a bunch of us that are going to.
Must be at my expense if you're laughing.
You've been happy and broke all your life, Sandy. Why don't you show Bob how to do it? Okay. Okay. How in hell did you ever land a jet on a moving carrier, given your condition, which I've heard about on your tapes? That's a good question. There is something about a situation like that that brings your focus into sharp attention, even though you may be very hungover and everything's hurting, and you're in your 20s. I mean, you know, you rebound and you are able to focus, and so. Granted, that takes a lot of skill, but there's doctors performing surgery, there's lawyers arguing cases in court, you name all the professions that people have out here, and somehow we were functioning and keeping it up, and obviously I never crashed, so I'm grateful for that.
What are the biggest differences between AA now and when you got sober? We're going to talk about that more tomorrow, aren't we? Isn't that part of what Sunday morning is? Can we?
Right, we promised to cover that.
Can we address that? We'll save that. Could you talk a bit about the history of women in Alcoholics Anonymous? Oh my God. Yeah, that's I don't know, the first woman that was in AA, to my knowledge, was Florence Rankin, and the longest sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous as a woman was Marty Mann, who was wonderfully important and a dear friend of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she helped start the National Council on the Education of Alcoholism, and there was some conflict about that, but she was kind of our person who became the known personality, the Betty Ford of her day, the person who became the face of alcoholism. And there were people that didn't like what she was doing, but I think the National Council on Alcoholism was vital when I came in. It was really a great organization and helped a hell of a lot of people get to AA and get to treatment and get to help. I think her role was a very important one, and she was an extraordinary woman. She was a strong woman, she came and talked to our AA group when I was about 5 years sober, and I've met her, been with her a number of times, and just a great lady. Beyond that, I don't have, I could do more, but those would be two of them.
Thank you, Bob. Okay. Any idea where I might find the Yale Survey of Alcoholics bill references in the journal, page 23 of the 12 and 12? Can't find the study. With love, Henry F. I have a Jelnick book. I'll give you my card. You can call me at home. And he was the guy that did the study, but it was also published by the Yale University Press, and I know that none of those are available because I was up there and I asked them about them because I thought it would be a great collector's item. Did you find one?
They don't have them, I thought.
Well, I went in the bookstore up there and they looked it up and couldn't find it. So you could go online, go to the Yale University Press, see if they have copies of the Yale study on alcoholism, probably 1949 to 52 or 51. It was done while I was there. I could be in that book somewhere.
But I don't know if going to the Yale Press, as I was thinking, that you might go to the library that might have historic archives related to it. Might be another place to go. And the other place that, just for point of question, would be the archives at AA or in the archives at Hazelwood. Because, there was a monthly letter, a monthly publication that came out of the Yale School on Alcoholism forever, wasn't there? But maybe not in the 40s. Can you expand a little on the acceptance and serenity prayer acceptance, as Dr. Paul explained?
Oh, boy. That's a hard one.
Yeah, it's what your whole life is about, I think. If you went, it's what Sandy was talking about, problems. Problems are only a problem because you don't want the experience that you're being put in front of. The degree of suffering that we have is the degree that we resist the experience that's in front of us. I think we all agree if we didn't have any problems, if we were at peace, if we were okay with life, if we were present, and that most of the mystics and wise people that we talk to say when you're in the present moment, there are no problems. Right now. This is one of the things I love about my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. At moments like this, when we get something kind of great going at a meeting, there's no problem. We're just present to it. There's just no problem. I don't care if you walked in here with a sick spouse or a child that's being thrown out of school or whatever the heck the experience is we may have walked in the room. In this present moment, there is no problem. And in that spiritual environment, we have a level of acceptance that we don't have when we're egocentric. And all I can tell you is that I think that's what our book talks about, and I think that's what I'm trying to do, is maintain my spiritual condition. I think that's what that refers to.
One other thought on that. This is where some confusion came up. If acceptance is the key to everything, then we don't need the courage to change anything. Do you follow what I'm saying? In other words, Dr. Paul's statement seems to be at odds with the serenity prayer. but it really isn't. Because unless you accept everything, you can't get undisturbed enough to know what you should do next. So it is true. It holds true even there. Okay. Have you quit drinking? After you quit drinking, how do you surrender your life? Have I quit? Well, except for the beer I had for lunch, I haven't. After you quit drinking, I'm sorry. How do you surrender your life? The second surrender. How do you do that? Okay. A lot of the progress is made in here by making a decision to do it and stop messing around thinking about it. In other words, I probably should surrender deeper. I really should. I really should. Well, then make a decision. Just say, I am going to surrender. I am going to turn my life over. And that becomes what your whole being is working on. It just opens it up. So we spend a lot of time getting ready to do things. You remember the whole thing, how long does it take to do a fourth step? 2 years and 3 hours. 2 years getting ready to do the fourth step, and then 3 hours to do it. And the same thing happens on all spiritual progress, is that we're getting ready. And so the process of letting go does continue to go on, but there's no reason that you shouldn't make a great deal of progress this week. You follow what I'm saying? Or even this afternoon. And then make more progress tomorrow afternoon. And then, in other words, now is the time. And a decision is a key thing. I mean, that's how God arrives in our life. We decide that He's going to be in our lives. And if we don't do that, then He won't be there. Decision is a big deal.
And it's funny, my life has been oriented. I always was a little surprised when they talked about the third step and the 12 and 12 that it was an action step. And it didn't seem like it was an action step. And what Sandy talked about, and clearly the old-timers felt making a decision was an action. So if you wanted to come over to the house and tell your story or make a decision, and I think many of us in today's language, in today's world, think that that's a mental process and more similar to how they approach the internal experience of the first two steps. And I think regaining the sense that making a decision is important and an action is regaining something in the third step that some of us have lost. Are we less effective at getting people to try AA than we were when you got sober? No. I think there are some things that aren't as good, and I think that there are things that are better. I see strong sponsorship today. We're being inundated. There's still a lot of treatment and people sending people to Alcoholics Anonymous. We have this kind of, we have a lot of members of Alcoholics Anonymous in the community I'm from, and we have these newer people that are living in sober houses and different sorts of things, and it's kind of like a floating crap game, but some great, wonderful, people in that process. I think we still do an awful lot of things well. I don't think we are quite as connected to the 12-step work that we used to be connected with for a variety of reasons. I think more people go to meetings for a more social basis today. I think it's younger, it's less married. There's a lot of differences that are going on today. So, but no, I think we still do a pretty good job.
I agree. If we give God all of the credit for sobriety, why do we blame the individual when they drink? Let me see if I understand. If we give God all the credit for our sobriety, why do we blame the individual when they drink? Well, I don't know if I do blame the individual. There's a lot of stuff in our literature where Bill says, when we ask the man why he drank, he comes up with a lot of answers, but the truth is he doesn't know. And I think that's the real answer, is that you don't know. It just happened. What the program would suggest is that we somehow allowed our connection to God to fade off so that it's like turning off the home burglar alarm. And then it got raided while we were gone. We shouldn't have turned it off. So if we have the protection against the first drink comes from God, but if we turn the alarm system off by not maintaining the contact, you can't blame God. You follow what I'm saying? You can't say, well, God let me down. I let myself down. Well, why did I let myself? Well, now we're into there is no answer to that question. We just pick ourselves up and move on. Too much time is wasted with the question, why?
And I think to some extent we do blame the person who drinks. I think it's human nature. I think we're all on the team. We feel like we get let down. We think they have a bad attitude or whatever it is. It depends on what our spiritual condition is at the time. The fact is the disease is cunning, baffling, and powerful. We don't know why people drink. We don't know why some people make it. We don't know why some people don't. When we're in a good place, I think we have peace with that. When we're more catty and more in our egos, we have opinions. What do we think about the current conference recommending that the Literature Committee write/obtain stories about spiritually, including stories from agnostics and atheists?
Don't get me started.
I'm going to get that. I know that is a pet. I'm going to give that question to Mr. Beach. I'm sorry.
Let me see how many people in this room think that we should have, when a newcomer comes in, they can go over to this table or this table. This table shows you how to stay sober without God, and this table shows you how to stay sober with God. Think that's a good plan? Okay, that's the end of that.
You and your simplicity.
That's where that's going.
I know. I thought we were going to get a half hour of good stuff. I thought. When the Big Book was published, were there really more than 100 men plus women who had recovered? No, there were not more than 100 men and women who had recovered. I get the impression that that was slightly exaggerated. I get the impression that the number was 70-ish or 80-ish. That's the extent of my information.
That's because they didn't have membership surveys back then. Because now we know exactly how many people we have.
You're getting cynical.
Okay. What do you do when you have done inventory plus everything you can to change and have failed? How do you change? Well, you obviously haven't done everything. If I have somebody like that, I go, you must stop trying to change right now. Get a white flag up and go, I can't change. It's impossible for me to change. Now you've surrendered. And now God can come in and help. You've been trying to change yourself. And we can't make spiritual progress without surrendering. That's the step to everything. I have to give up. It's impossible to grow spiritually on our own. But our ego wants us to do it. And I love the sentences. We've created a lot of great sentences that cover this. I do the possible, God does the impossible. I do the legwork, God does the rest. I do this, blah, blah, blah. God helps with the legwork. God helps cleaning floors. Don't keep coming up with parts of your life that you leave God out of, because that's all that is. I do this part, I do the possible, God does the impossible. That means, God, I don't want you involved in any of this stuff that I know how to do on my own. That means I'm going to spend a lot of my time without God, that was the ego's trick, coming up with sentences like that. God will help you brush your teeth. Just hang out with him while you're doing it and watch how much fun it is. So the first step in that, the answer to that is to get a white flag out and give up and say, I can't possibly do this, and now you're on your way.
In the mind and the ego, those two kind of lion-looking dogs they have outside of the Buddhist temples, the food dog, those two dogs guard the temple of acceptance, and one dog is ignorance and the other dog is apathy. So when we go to change something, the first dog says, I really want to change this, but I don't know how. You run that one to death until people are tired of hearing it, and then they tell you how, and then you go to apathy. I know how, but I just can't seem to get myself to do it. And you go back and forth between those two dogs until you get the flag out. Most of the issues that we have in our life live at the level of complaint. They do not live at the level of a piece of business. Can you share a little about Jimmy Burwell, and did he ever believe in a power greater than himself? Very much so. I only know Jim Burwell through a couple of tapes that I've heard of his. I found him to be delightful. I found him to be, as opposed to Clarence, who got to be kind of a curmudgeon and a complainer, and he had some resentments about Bill. Burwell, who didn't always have an easy go of it, seemed to have a delightful attitude about his experience and his role in Alcoholics Anonymous.
I have another story about Burwell. And this is true about all parts of the country. Whoever started AA in your area, there's still things going on because of that. You know what I mean? Like in Tampa, all the meetings started at 8:15. What the hell is that? They've changed them now to 7 or 5. And everybody said, well, remember, if we went all the way back, there were two guys, and they're getting ready to start a meeting. And one guy said, I don't get off work till now. It has to be 8:15. Okay. And then everybody else who started a meeting started at 8:15. So anyway, Burwell did not believe in having these roundups. He went to Philadelphia. And there's places in New England. No, we don't have those. We don't have an event like this. We don't have it. Why? I don't know. We just don't. And you'd have to go back to whoever it was. So I don't know if any of you guys know Bobby Coyle. He speaks around, the Philadelphia cop. He finally said, the hell with this. We're starting a roundup in Philadelphia. And he had the firecracker roundup on the 4th of July. And he held it 1 year, and then the powers that be, the voice of Jim Burwell, came back and said, we're going to put that thing out of existence. And he held it 1 more year, and then they shut it down. Nobody went. Because we don't have roundups in Philadelphia. And so you see the power of what went on before. And I'm sure sometimes if somebody says, well, I don't read the 12 and 12. Why? Well, my sponsor didn't read it. Well, why didn't he read it? His sponsor didn't read it. But nobody read it and made the decision on their own. We just carry on. And I think it's fun in a way that does that. Oh, I have to answer a question. I made up a question and answered one. Why don't they have conferences in Philadelphia? That was here. Why isn't working with others emphasized more in AA? Gee whiz. I thought it was. I mean, we can't go on 12-step calls like we used to because people go to treatment, and then they generally get in here, and then we have to unlearn what they learned in treatment. and start all over. But and Bill in the 12 and 12 talks about maybe not all of us are going to do well at sponsoring, and so we can make the coffee at the meetings, and we can help out on the social programs, and we can help out on all that. But the vast majority, I think, work with others. The joy of taking someone through the steps is one of the greatest joys there is. And over the last 5 years, when I sponsor people, the first words I tell them when we sit down is, I am going to show you how to have a spiritual awakening. When we get through, you will have had a spiritual awakening. So I put it all on the table on the first day, and I've never had someone not have one. So there.
Wow. Despite the several references in the book, including Dr. Paul, to the use of sedatives, there are those who decry any mention of drugs at an AA meeting using our singleness of purpose as a support for this comment. I think as a practical matter, most of us treat sobriety as being free from alcohol and mood-altering drugs. In the early days, we saw some old-timers that got on medications, and they were they were zonked on medications, and I don't think that was a real common problem, but I saw it, and I don't think you can restrict what people say. I think today's alcoholic, we don't have as many pure bourbon drinking opinion. We don't have as many bourbon drinking alcoholics, and the people that I'm sure if I were out there, I wasn't a pill user, but I was sure if I was out there today and someone offered, I would have said no, thank you. I don't think we're being inundated by mistakes in Alcoholics Anonymous today, and I think people should have the reasonable freedom to be able to talk about their experiences. I find that people who used a lot of drugs, if their attitude is correct, they do not try to slop over the singleness of purpose. They kind of understand it, and they relate, they say what they have to say without being outlandish. I think some of the people who start talking about drugs and other use kind of want to stand out and kind of want to be different, and there's an ego aspect in that causes attention to them and to do that. But I think that the complexity of today is that most alcoholics have multiple, use, and I don't think you can restrict the use. I don't think we need to. I really think we have a strong enough culture in our fellowship, but I'd hate to see it hurt by. What do you have to say about that, Sam?
I think the point of the fifth tradition was that the 12 steps will fix, I think there's 140 organizations. It'll fix 140 problems. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't matter if it's sex addiction, gambling addiction, all of these different addictions. And the decision was, well, should we have all 140 come to AA, or should we give the steps to the other problems? And the decision was, we're going to give the steps to the other problems. And we are going to specialize in alcohol. And so that way we won't get diluted by trying to solve all kinds of different problems. And so that, it was so essential before treatment centers that identification take place. And what that means is when I tell my story on a 12-step call, the person I'm talking to will identify with me. And we felt so strongly about it that if the person was a periodic, we didn't send a regular drunk to call on them. We tried to find a periodic so the connection would be solid and he would trust that person. And so if we went there, what is being suggested is just talk about the alcohol to get the identification, because he has the alcohol problem or he won't be coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's all these other problems. So we don't stop people. We don't get up and go, you can't do that in the meeting and you can't say that. We try to educate people so that they voluntarily, out of respect for the tradition, minimize talking about other problems and really focus on alcohol. It's a courteous thing rather than a barked order, because You know, if you yell at somebody, they're going to do it till the cows come home. So we have to inspire cooperation.
You're next.
What is your personal concept of a higher power?
2 days.
Huh?
You're limited to 2 days.
No, it's very simple. My concept of the higher power is totally drawn on the experience of this higher power that I've had. So if my higher power took away the obsession to drink, that's part of the attribute of my higher power. You see what I'm saying? And if he did, in fact, reduce my anger, and if he does, in fact, every time I go to him, help me with something, that is my concept. So it's not based on some school book thing, it's based on experience. All my experiences constitute the concept. So it's very personal and it's very real. It's not a theory. Do you see what I'm saying? And so just because we live in America, we've come up with a 3-letter word to describe what this power is, and we use God. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's a shortcut. For 5 years, I said higher power, just to make sure nobody was that childhood God that I didn't like. And then I go, you can say God a lot faster than higher. Yeah, I can. So I shifted over. So when we say this in here, when I say God, I trust God, I do God, I mean this source that has given me all these experiences. And I don't mean anything else from it. So in the beginning, you have a relationship with a word. That's all that is. When you pray to God and you're just starting out, you're praying to the word God. Do you understand what I'm saying? There isn't anything else. You're just going, okay, word God, I understand if I do this that something is going to happen. And then when something happens, now you have a relationship other than a word. And it's like the word becomes real, right before your own eyes. And it's a very personal thing. And so when we use that word, it's a shortcut to just so we all know what we're talking about. Your experience practicing these principles. And I hope that can, then we can eliminate debating with what that means and all of that.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. We live in a small town and struggle frequently with integrating and not integrating addicts into our fellowship. Please discuss the issue. We did a little bit. I'm probably more on the liberal end of the scale about this, but I would not want to give up anything that would hurt Alcoholics Anonymous, but I have a different view than some people have. I think the alcoholic of today is often a multi-chemical user. That's just my experience. I think if and some of the people we see have been messed up since they've been 13 or 12 years old, and they use, a lot of the reasons they use drugs is because they could use them during school and they couldn't get detected and all this sort of thing, and when they found alcohol and were able to use it freely, they clearly qualified for our program. And especially in a small community where you don't have a choice of groups and you have a few people at a meeting, I can see how that would be a serious problem to have someone who's, pretty clearly mostly an addict and doesn't try to adapt himself to the program. That isn't, I live in an area where there's, 800 meetings a night in the metropolitan area, and I do not have that problem. And I haven't been in enough small meetings to have it.
Obviously, you're going to get lots of answers to this, and I think prayer is one way to get answers. The one thing I did hear is that the more liberal we are, the weaker NA will be in that area. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. What information can you share about beginners meetings? I don't think we have any in Tampa. I remember some in Washington, D.C., so I'm not a good source. We just, we continue talking about whatever the topic is, unless it's somebody's first meeting. And that's what I did. I just was at, if it was the topic was the 10th step and I'm just in my second week, I just sat and listened. I was told by my sponsor, you don't comment. And so there wasn't anything tailored where you went through a month's worth of indoctrination. That was left up to the sponsor. And that's what I'm the beginner meeting for the person I'm sponsoring, and we go through everything, and I answer all their questions and give them briefings on everything. So myself, I'm not familiar with that. Do you have beginner meeting? Oh, okay, so Bob knows the answer.
One of my dear friends has a 700-person meeting in Chicago, and they have a beginners meeting before the meeting at 7 o'clock. In order to sit in the chairs in the middle of the room, you have to have less than a year, and it's been a very successful. If you have more than a year, you sit in the chairs that are on the outside, and they have had unbelievably wonderful success with that meeting. We have a beginners group with the group I go to. We have 200 members on a Monday night 6 o'clock meeting, and we break up into 14. One person gives a step. We break up into 14 rooms, but the main room where we have the meeting is the beginners room. We have 4 people assigned to that room, and they talk about, we call it a first step meeting, not a beginners meeting. That's the extent of my experience with beginners meetings. Please talk about the Little Red Book. Remember the meeting I told you about that had that bought a couple of thousand big books before the traditions came out? It was written in that group by a man by the name of Ed Webster and Barry Collins by the Col Webb Press. People, Pat Cronin, we think was the founder of AA in our area. Some people think it was Barry Collins. When Chan Foreman came from Chicago to make a trip during the Armistice Day storm of 1940, they got snowed in and they called on, Barry was in the hospital and they called on Pat, and Alcoholics Anonymous started. Pat Cronin was clearly the most active man. Started the founders group in Alcoholics Anonymous. They got into some disagreement and they had a break off and they started the Nicollet Avenue Family Group. You got to be white, married, no drugs, and your wife had to attend the meetings. They visited you in the hospital. You had to be hospitalized for about 3 days. They interviewed during that process, and if you were determined to be a good prospect, they brought you to the meeting. It was one of the strongest meetings and largest groups of Alcoholics Anonymous in the Midwest, and it carried the message to Winnipeg, to many places in Canada, and many places around the Midwest. Barry Collins and Ed Webster wrote Bottles and Stools, a Little Red Book, and Our Devilish Alcoholic Personality. They were interesting men and did significant things and were great. Dr. Bob was close to the Nicollet Avenue Family Group. Bill Wilson was close to the Founders Group at 2218 First Avenue South in Minneapolis. Bill would come in and they'd go on fishing trips. Bob would come in to his group and he would go do that. When I went through the literature at Bob Smith's, when Sue Windows allowed me to go through the books that her father had that they sold to Brown University, I was trying to raise money to get them put in the Cleveland Intergroup or Akron, and she wouldn't sell them to me, as it turned out, and then later sold them for a larger amount of money to Brown University. In there, we found the manuscript of the Little Red Book, and Dr. Bob was probably helping edit the Little Red Book. Bill came out with the 12 and 12 about the same time that the Little Red Book was published, and people have been pushing Bob to get, or Bill to get the book out. So some people would say the progress of the Little Red Book might have been a motivation for Bill to finally get the 12 and 12 out. It was a guide. When I came into AA in the Minneapolis area, we went to 4-step classes. It wasn't an intergroup, but it was one of the big groups in Minneapolis. We went in and there were the first 3 steps were the first day, the first Saturday meeting. The next Saturday, they were 3 through 6. 4 through 6, 4, 5, and 6. The next Saturday was 7, 8, and 9, and the next Saturday was 10 through 12. And when you were done, you got a little red book. And and the Little Red Book was a guide to the big book. I mean, there's nothing sinful about the book. I mean, it is a interesting book, and I think with an open mind, it's a very interesting piece of literature and won't do harm to anybody.
I couldn't agree more. Can you explain why people, AAs, who've had spiritual transformations can and do sometimes drink again? Okay, obviously, any question that starts with why can't be answered. I mean, there's no way you could explain why someone in your group who appeared to have had solid spiritual footings went back out. And so you just have to accept it and don't try to understand it. What people do with this, you see, your ego sees that and it jumps on it as a way of scaring you. It says, look, they had a spiritual awakening, went back out. You're very vulnerable now. You could be drinking any second. If that person went, you see what happens? We use it as a scare mechanism to tell ourselves this whole thing doesn't work and all that. So just go, there's no way of knowing. It's a mystery. But this program, just look what it does for people all over the world. So if there's just one little mystery, and I would just stop trying to figure it out. When the person comes back, they can share with you what it was.
What is the most significant or memorable spiritual experience that you have had? I don't know that I could answer that question. I would have probably said it was the experience that I had at 7 years or 8 years of sobriety when I had that experience in my living room, which was kind of a second surrender experience. I feel like I'm going through a pretty profound period of my life right now. I don't like some of what I've seen, but I think the most significant spiritual experience that many of us had is the one we're in. And it might be that I'm still in the Big Bang that Sandy talked about, that the spiritual experience that I'm experiencing now is the continuation of what happened to me when I made the call to Alcoholics Anonymous.
That's a good way of looking at it. We still have more in here. We can save them for Sunday, or we can keep going.
These two are.
Okay. Can one 12-step fellowship serve for all problems, or is there a need to join more fellowships? Well, I think we discussed that. Technically, it could. But I think there would be mass confusion in here if our first speaker was a sex addict, and our second speaker was a gambling addict, and our third speaker was an overeater, and our fourth speaker was a cocaine addict, and our fifth, I think we'd all be going, Jesus, I just can't relate to all these people. And so
But I think they're talking about a drunk who's got also maybe a problem with gambling.
Right.
Does he go,
Now, I would say sometimes the 12 steps take care of 2 or 3 problems that we have.
Or 28.
Or 28, or whatever. And sometimes it's necessary to go to another program or to a therapist. Bill encouraged us to go talk to therapists and get help wherever we can get it. And then having gotten that help, we will find that our path to God has been eased up quite a bit, that we had a little blockage there, and now we come back. So it's going to contribute to our spiritual growth, and it's not a statement that, oh, this spiritual program is so weak it can't solve this thing that the psychiatrists solve. They go together.
Part of the problem that I see with people who are in multiple programs is it's very difficult. It's difficult enough to surrender a depth to one issue and program. To go to a second program, I think sometimes they go to that almost as a self-improvement program and they relate to it differently. They don't do 90 and 90, they don't get a sponsor, they don't relate it in the same way that they did with the core thing. And yet I know a number of successful people and great members of Alcoholics Anonymous that belong to more than one fellowship. How would you start a conversation with a wet drunk to show attraction rather than promotion? I wouldn't. I'm not afraid of talking to a wet drunk. in that state of mind, when someone's intoxicated, they just aren't going to be able to hear anything spiritual. Something might get through, you know, and so I've even joked about it. Yeah, I got to go to those meetings, and mostly what I want to do is not give them the impression that I'm anti-alcohol or that I have a bad attitude about the fact that he's drinking. You want to drink, drink. You know, if you get to a point where you think, you know, I've had a lot of people, once they find out I'm an AA, we're in a golf cart or something like that, and they think, God, maybe I should join your organization. And I said, God, I'd have no idea. I mean, I stayed out of it as long as I could, and, you know, and, no, but I do, because I don't want to give them the impression that I'm a guy floating around looking for people who got drinking problems. You know, and yet I wouldn't mind being a guy, you know, that if they ever were, and I talk freely and openly about my own experience.
The one thing that I do is I try to communicate that my drinking problem is much worse than theirs. You follow what I'm saying? I say,
That's sick.
no, it isn't. I simply say, my drinking almost killed me, so I had to go do something about it. And then I leave. And then he may go, well, mine's not killing me, or he may go, I think mine is killing me. But it made no judgment on him, is what I'm getting at.
I like that.
See what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
My drinking almost killed me. Yours probably isn't. But at least I left that thing that there's no way to talk sense to a wet drunk, but we can try.
We're done.
Hey, we're done, everybody, till tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody. And we'll do some of these.